Hi everyone, today I want to talk about choosing the right difficulty when you're starting out in Diablo 4. So as you may know from playing the open beta or the server slam, you can actually choose between two different difficulties when you make your first character. Now this is going to change later in the game when there are nightmare and torment difficulties unlocking basically at certain levels and recommended for certain levels. But at least for the 1 to 50 leveling experience, you have the choice between adventurer and veteran, that both go exactly in that same range. And you see that veteran does not actually really increase anything all that much. So the question arises, do you actually want to play on veteran at all if it's about efficiency and not just about, having more fun with a more challenging game? So when I played in Server Slam and in the open beta weekends, I was almost exclusively playing on veteran. But a lot of people didn't, and a lot of people also kept discussing this, like, is it actually reasonable to do that? Does it actually make sense? Especially for those a bit weaker classes early on, that for example Druid kind of needs some time to pick up the pace, and the Barbs as well. They're not really that fast in the early game leveling most of the time, compared to something like, for example, Sorcerer or rogues that just are relatively powerful from the start with high damage output. Now, we don't know the exact details of what changing the difficulty actually does. Like, we know that monsters become faster, smarter, they aim better, the elite affixes become more powerful, and they maybe spawn them more often, or they hit the wider area and these kind of things. So this is what these enemies are more challenging means. So it's not just like a number scaling, but these difficulties actually change the game. So that's actually a very cool design in my opinion. And this is gonna increase later on as well when you go to Nightmare and to Torment difficulties. But to stick to the topic of Adventurer versus Veteran, the only real benefit they gain here is 20% more experience from monsters. So the gold, we can say, is irrelevant at this point, I guess, because low-level items are just worth a lot less than high-level items. So basically all the gold that you're gonna make, in the lifetime of your character is gonna be towards the end of it and not at the start. So gold is irrelevant, basically, at the early levels, because also respeccing doesn't cost anything. You don't really spend much on, like, legendary upgrading or anything like that. So it's just about the monster experience here. We're also not even sure if the drops are increased. It doesn't seem so. It also doesn't say anything. So it might just be the same drops that you get on Veteran and Adventurer as well. At least when we did a quarter Garn farm in the server slam, basically everyone was just doing it on World Tier 1 because it was easier. Monsters were just like, easier to maneuver around. They just didn't hit you that much, and you were able to survive easier, and you still seem to get like a good amount of drops there all the time. So I also didn't really notice much of a difference. And that being said, basically everything I've played was on Veteran, and I never really switched to Adventurer, but I did try it here and there. And one thing that I noticed is that at least bosses seem to have significantly less HP on Adventurer difficulty. This is also supported by the fact that the developers, for example, suggested to people to actually play an Adventurer to defeat Ashava. And it also seemed to me that on World Tier 1, Ashava was a bit easier than on World Tier 2. So there might be certain like HP and or damage scaling involved, at least for bosses and maybe elites, that just slows you down even if you have no trouble surviving. And in consequence, if you want to play a veteran, you need to find a sweet spot where this 20% experience is more gain than the time that you lose by progressing more slowly through, killing those bosses more slowly, or through, trying to play more defensively with your setup. You have to maybe include another defensive skill. You may have to include defensive passives to stay alive because you play on veteran and there's generally a higher incoming damage amount. And the thing is that 20% experience is actually not really that much of a bonus, especially because if you're playing the campaign, you don't actually get more XP from the quests, and some of those campaign quests actually give you a significant boost in XP when you complete them. And those do not seem to be amplified by this, because it only talks about monster experience. And also from the testing that I've seen, it does not increase. So this 20% bonus XP is actually not exactly 20% bonus XP because of the quests that you complete. So it may end up being something like 15% bonus XP or something like that, maybe even less. I don't know exactly what is the distribution between monster XP and quest XP, but it will probably be somewhere around that number. And Well, in that case, we are actually not really gaining all that much. And not everyone is going to play a class or a build that will just like easy peasy blast through veteran from the start. Well, it seems like adventure is actually going to be the choice for pretty much everyone, including myself actually. So while I said that I played on veteran basically all the time in those server slam weekends, etc., I think really I'll also do adventurer just to like fly through the campaign a little bit faster. Now there is something to consider here, which is that you do get total less XP. So even though you are faster, maybe going through the campaign, doing those campaign quests, you are going to end up with less XP total than if you had done it on veteran. And this might mean that you actually end up under-leveled if you just rush through the campaign. So there might be a bit of like a bigger reason to do side content while doing the campaign. For example, getting like a renown skill point here, renown skill point there. I think this is generally going to be a pretty good strategy to at least pick up the first skill point in each of the regions as you progress through the campaign. And you're probably going to stay kind of on track with the recommended level that you should be for the zones that you're going to, because the zone levels increase over time. But in general, I think that we're going to see most people actually play an adventurer, even though veteran is not exactly hard, but yeah, it's slower basically in most cases. So the only time when veteran is going to be useful, I think, is when you are kind of like getting a huge power spike, for example, on the rogue. At level 15, you get a class quest, you get a combo points, and at level 20, you get inner sight. So you have like a really huge power spike at both these levels, depending on your build. And this can be similar for other classes when you unlock your class specializations. For example, on the Zorks, you have the enchantment slot at level 15 and then another one at 30. These are huge power spikes, and those might actually be those moments where it won't really matter if monsters are a bit more challenging, if bosses are a little bit more tanky, and maybe you actually want to switch to veteran for a while and then go back to adventurer. But maybe start on adventurer, go until you feel really overpowered, then switch. And, maybe you're also going to get a big legendary drop. You might find like a really huge weapon, for your main skill. And suddenly you do like twice the damage or something. So those are definitely those moments where I would consider going to veteran and then just blasting through it with higher XP gained. But for the most part, it's probably the safest bet to just start on adventurer. This will also ensure that when you're playing through the campaign for the first time, you're going to have an easy time defeating all those bosses because, you don't know the mechanics, you don't know the fights. So it's generally harder than, doing it the second or the third time or something like that because, of the unknown factor. So this is another reason to go adventurer in my book. Later on, you won't really have that luxury of choosing anymore, so you kind of have to go nightmare. I guess the only option that you have here is deciding on when to go there. So once you reach level 50, around that time, maybe plus minus a few levels, you want to complete that capstone dungeon to unlock nightmare difficulty. And then you see here recommended for 50 to 70. So on veteran and adventurer, the monsters will probably just like stop scaling at level 50. You also cannot find those sacred items. You cannot find unique items. And if those monsters don't scale up anymore after level 50 and they're just kind of capped in that range, similar with the 50 to 70 from Nightmare, you are forced to move on to the next difficulty, at the very least around that level. And the same with Torment as well. So if you go here, it says level 70 plus. So it will have this level floor at 70. And then from there, the monsters just scale up all the way to 100. But at least for the early levels, you can definitely optimize around those two difficulties. But there's one last thing to consider here, and that is that especially when you're not doing the campaign, for example, on your second character, veteran difficulty might generally be the better option actually, because you don't really have to fight those campaign bosses anymore that will massively slow you down when they have higher HP. And you can just grind and you don't have to do quests anymore. So for example, what people were doing to try to speedrun 1 to 20 or 1 to 25 in the betas was that they were just grinding the same dungeon over and over and over, which you can still do when you're in a party, or you have like the strategy that I also previewed for the server slam with like, you do a dungeon, you do an event, you do a dungeon, you do an event, these kind of things. Or you just go around, the areas and, for example, complete dungeon by dungeon, just grinding your way through and completing renown objectives. In those cases, the monster HP scaling of bosses doesn't matter at all because you're not really fighting any real bosses most of the time. And you also don't really complete quests that do not gain the 20% bonus XP. So then you have pretty much like a flat bonus of 20% XP for the most part. So if you're doing any kind of like grinding to level 50 strategy outside of like doing the campaign, then this is definitely the way to go, I think. And this is also what we have seen from some testing. For example, Gymnasium has done some speedrunning tests. He's like one of the big Diablo 2 speedrunners in the world right now. And he actually was significantly faster playing on Veteran. In the open beta, up to level 25, he benchmarked his times from 1 to 25. And you can see here that on World Tier 1, he took roughly 2 hours. And on World Tier 2, it took 1 hour 40 minutes. And of course, there's a bit of RNG with, you know, what kind of drops you're getting when you get like a big weapon upgrade. But you can definitely see that this point that I just mentioned definitely holds up because you get more XP and this XP carries you to the high levels faster. But you can definitely see that this point that I just mentioned holds up, where if you mainly grind and you don't really have to deal with bosses, you don't have to deal with quests, then the Veteran is a pretty good choice. So in the end, my recommendation is for everyone to start on Adventurer, unless you want to have it a bit more challenging. So if you don't care about the actual efficiency, then yeah, Veteran is definitely more fun, I think. But when it comes to speedrunning, when it comes to, you know, learning the game, Adventurer is probably the way to go. And then maybe you can try to swap it around sometimes. Just go to the statue in Kiev Shard. You can switch it to Veteran, maybe after a huge upgrade, as I mentioned, like your class specialization, like a huge legendary weapon or something like that. There might be those breakpoints where you're just going to switch for a while, get some free extra XP, and that's about it. So those are my 2 cents on the topic. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you're going to do, or if you have any other thoughts on this, or any other testing you have done even. That would be great to know. And otherwise, I'll see you guys next time.